Hello, this is Dr. Robert Faust, and I'm with you here at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. And I just had a few ideas, some theories, some scientific facts, my thoughts on the whole thing, and how does it really relate to cycles? Like cycles of soil, cycles of civilization, cycles of organisms in general, which is a build-up to a maximum level and then a crash. And that's like everything from bacteria to yeast to animal populations to mice to insects, you name it, locusts. Okay, so are we any different? Now, some of the research that I've been looking into, and I've been trying to get all the answers for myself, my family, and my employees of how we can avoid this virus. Well, first of all, you have to understand it. Now, as a plant pathologist, agronomist, agroecologist, and I was licensed in California as a plant pathologist, as an entomologist, to give people advice, farmers advice on plant viruses. Okay, now I've also worked a lot with livestock, so I kind of understand viral diseases. I studied medical entomology, and it has a lot to do with viruses because insects are the vectors of a lot of viruses. For instance, dengue fever, it's a nasty one. Okay, so there seems to be, first of all, most people don't know what a virus is. It's not like bacteria. It's not a living organism. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around. The virus that's you inhale, that ends up in your lungs and replicating is a viral particle. It's not a living organism. That's what's kind of the mystery about viruses. What are they? Are they alive? Are they dead? Are they a mineral? That really kind of hasn't been answered. They're almost pure genetic information. They carried RNA, and they have to, let's say, take over a cell, a living cell. Whether that's an animal, plant, whatever, a living cell, period. And once they manage to get into a living cell, then they replicate themselves by replication cycles that have to do with RNA. You have RNA and you have DNA viruses. I really don't want to go into all that right now, because it takes so long. But let me just show you a chart of a cell and what happens in that cell. Viral particles get on the surface of the cell. That's why they have all those extensions on the outside of the viral particle that hook up to the cell. And they manage to enter the cell, unless they're engulfed by T helper cells or white blood cells or any number of our own resistance mechanisms, our own cells that we have that protect us against things like viruses, bacteria, and that sort of thing. Now, you'll notice in this chart an interesting thing. It's the diverse stages of viral replication cycles that are inhibited by zinc. Okay, zinc. Zinc in vitro studies have demonstrated a number of mechanisms which zinc interferes with viral replication cycle. So these include free virus inactivation, inhibition of viral uncoating, of viral genome transcription. That's the virus duplicating its own genetic materials within the cell. That's a viral genome transcription. And viral protein translation and polyprotein processing. So it sounds complicated because it is. Okay. DNA polymerase, all these things. Okay, so all these different viruses, herpes simplex, human rhinovirus, that's like a cold. These are essentially parasites. They're opportunistic. Parasites in general don't want to kill their host because that's their living and their livelihoods. They don't want to kill their host. So a successful parasite doesn't kill its host. You live with it. We have lots of parasites. So do animals, so do plants. Quite a few crop plants have viruses, and generally they reduce the yield, something like that. They don't completely destroy the crop. Okay, so viruses don't generally destroy the host, ideally. They want to get in equilibrium, so they just get what they need, and the host stays alive to feed that parasite. And viruses are definitely a parasite. Are they a living animal? No. They're just a piece of genetic material that replicates within your cell or plant cell. Okay, but now, as this chart shows, when there's zinc in the picture, okay, at every stage, it inhibits the viral particle. When it's attaching to the cell, it's inhibited. When it's within the cell, trying to replicate, trying to do transcription, it's inhibited. Okay, so we have very good evidence that zinc plays a huge part in resistance to viruses. It's a scientific fact. And that's like it shows here, it's HIV, HCR, SARS, corona, influenza. Zinc's involved. It's involved on the outside of the cell, inside of the cell nucleus, zinc. Okay, so this is from a scientific paper. So how do I know this is true? I know people have a problem with what's true and what isn't. Okay, but to know what's true and what isn't, you really need to the credibility of the people telling you the story. Okay, this is a scientific publication. You can look it up on the internet. It's the role of zinc in antiviral immunity. Scott Reed, Stephanie Obid, from the University of Sydney, Australia, Blacktown Medical School, Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. The Westmead Institute for Medical Research, Kirby Institute, University of New South Wales, Sydney, Australia. Okay, didn't come from the U.S. We don't have a monopoly on knowledge. We don't. Australian researchers are just as good. Maybe they're better because they don't have an economic incentive or pressure from lobbyists and grants from big pharma, maybe. Okay, so that's good science as far as I'm concerned. And and then there's all kinds of data on what the effects in clinical trials, antiviral. Okay, so it's a very interesting thing. Now let me tie this into agroecology a little bit. Okay, first of all, there's been studies done on trace elements. People think, we need minerals. Yeah, you need minerals. Okay, but you need specific minerals and specific balance for normal health and resistance of the cell. Just like my last video about the humus theory of plant nutrition versus the mineral theory. Yeah, you can grow a plant with minerals. You can feed, that food to people. But what's missing? What's missing? The elements and the substances that provide resistance to disease. So when you use a hydroponic system, it doesn't have humic substances. The trace elements are usually not really ideal or in balance or sufficient. So then you end up having plants that are unhealthy. And then you have to rescue those plants with chemicals, fungicides, you name it, insecticides. It's crop rescue. Okay, so when we look at societies and how people developed and what happened, our European ancestors that are in Europe today, that are in the US today, that are in North America in general, migrated from Central Asia and points south, like the Middle East, Africa. Why do they keep migrating? Because they couldn't maintain a sustainable agricultural system. Or in the case of most Northern Europeans, they were hunter-gatherers. They grazed livestock and like migratory patterns. Well, eventually everything wears out. The bubble bursts. The soil fertility isn't there. The crop yields aren't there. There's trace element deficiencies. They don't know that. But then diseases happen in their livestock, and then their own populations start to go down due to diseases, and they have no idea what's causing these diseases. It's the gods, right? And tell somebody it wasn't the gods, and they'd probably, burn you at the stake. Okay, I mean, the germ theory of disease didn't even come into practice until the late 19th century. So you have thousands of years where people don't even know what's causing these diseases. They're blaming on other people. They're blaming on the gods, you name it. But they just keep moving west, and then things seem to get better, So bottom line, they move into hardwood forests and forested areas with rich, deep soils and humic substances. And they'd plant crops and they'd prosper, populations would grow, soils would be depleted, the disease cycle would happen again, and Lord knows we had a lot of disease cycles in European history. Plagues galore, okay? Like huge populations of Europe wiped out, a third to a half. There's different theories on how many, but a bunch, okay? Now, when they started moving west and they hit the Atlantic Ocean, Holland and Germany, France, wherever, they hit the Atlantic Ocean, well, they had to modify their farming techniques, utilizing livestock mixed farming systems where they had composted manure to put back on the ground, build the humic substances, which help release the nutrients from the soil. And then crops would prosper. They did pretty good. Okay, so that's sort of, but then population growth overwhelms that. And you have plant diseases. How about the Irish potato famine? See, they thought they had the answer. They brought in potatoes from South America. What a wonderful miracle crop. And brought them in. But soon they succumbed to a fungal disease. Probably several, but potato blight. Did fine at first, until the plants ran out of nutrients. Okay, so surveys have shown that the major nutrient that we are deficient in the US, maybe in the rest of the world, is zinc. There's been studies, like what are the priority nutrients that we're deficient in? Well, zinc is one of them. Selenium may be another, okay? Matter of fact, it could be a whole range of trace elements. You have anemia if you're iron deficient. It's complex. Okay, so when I worked in crop management, and the biggest deficiency we would see on crops like beans, these are all human foods, corn, beans, potatoes, things like that, was zinc. And so we would apply a lot of zinc. We sell a lot of zinc. Okay, but zinc doesn't work unless it has a chelator. Now, most of the zinc products I sold were chelated with humic substances, humic acid, fulvic acid. It's a chelator. Okay, it's just exactly how it works in nature. Soil builds up organic matter. It decomposes by fungi, the same organisms that produce antibiotics, and they help release the mineral, dead mineral, and turning into an organic form in conjunction with the transport factor, which is fulvic acid, that can transport it into the root system, into the cells, and into the food. You eat the food, you get the zinc, or the rest of the trace elements. Okay, And so over time, these zinc, as the humic substances go down in the soil, so does the uptake of trace elements. I've shown that. I've proven that for 50 years. Leaf analysis, soil analysis. A big problem now is they use so much phosphate because they haven't considered the effect of silicates. That's a whole nother discussion. Okay, so excess phosphate in a low organic matter soil with low humus ties the zinc up. And so ties the phosphate too. So they put more phosphate, ties up more zinc. It's a physiological disorder at the root zone. So the zinc will not get transported into the plant. So you end up with a zinc deficiency. Okay, let's tie that in with some other trace elements. For instance, in Wuhan, China, that particular zone in China, the soil maps, if you want to check into it, the soils are highly deficient in selenium. Now, I worked as a health officer in Montana way back when, in the 70s, and we'd get a lot of dead people, have dead calves, and they'd have what they call white muscle disease. And that was totally tied to lack of selenium. So, the people that lived there also had lack of selenium. They just didn't know it, okay? The calves were dying, and we knew it. So you have selenium, and it just happens to be the most deficient in areas where we seem to see these big outbreaks of coronavirus. Like Italy's another one, Wuhan. Okay, so I could go on and on. Point of the matter is, we know the antiviral role of zinc. We know that phosphate ties up zinc. We know that farmers use too much chemical zinc fertilizers, soluble zinc fertilizer, soluble phosphates, okay, that tie up the zinc. We know that, okay? So maybe we can put 2 and 2 together. I know that's hard to do using the scientific method because you'd have to set up controls and double blind and all that stuff. It would be extremely hard to prove this. But I think the scientific principles of my thesis, and I'm not saying it's a fact, I'm saying it's a theory, that the lack of zinc and selenium and possibly other trace elements has led to a reduced resistance to viruses. Now, not everybody gets this virus. Now, why is that? That's another mystery. How come some people get it, some people don't? Okay, well, that's a variation in maybe their trace element, their diet, whatever, But it's not uniform. Not everybody gets it. Okay, so it turns out that taking 50 milligrams of zinc per day may be divided into 2 doses, 25 milligrams each. That's 25 milligrams elemental zinc. So if you took zinc sulfate, that's 36%. So you're going to have to take roughly 3 times, 2.8 times 50 milligrams to get enough zinc. Now, zinc is toxic at higher levels, pretty high levels. It's toxic. It's like a lot of medicines are a medicine at a low level, they're toxic at a high level. Okay, then the element that carries the zinc is the fulvic acid. Also, my research has shown that you've heard a lot about chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine phosphate. These are the anti-malarial drugs that we seem to indicate, the research I'm reading anyway, from China and other places show that it is effective, but it seems to be that it's doing that by transporting, it's what they call a ionophore. So it's a substance that transports an ion, like a zinc ion, through the cell membrane into the cell, and then into the cell nucleus, okay? But it's a very toxic compound. See, and it has antiviral effects. It has microbial effects. We don't know why. Is it just because it transports zinc? Maybe. It seems to have maybe some other effects, but it's kind of hard to separate those effects. But we know it transports zinc into the cell, and maybe that's why it's working. So some of the best suggestions, I'm not giving them, but what I'm reading is that zinc transported by chloroquine could be either both preventative and or curative, or moderates the effect of in this case, coronavirus. So fulvic acid also transports metals, ions, into the cell nucleus, into the cell nucleus, and it can carry zinc, and it can carry other metals or metallic ions. But we also know that humic substances, fulvic acid, is antiviral in itself. So we're talking about the effect of humic substances. There's quite a bit of evidence and research over the years on the effect of, here's clinical research with influenza A virus and herpes simplex virus type 1 showed humic acid to be effective against the two viruses. This has apparently also led to the development of a lipstick containing humic acid to prevent reoccurrences of UV radiation-induced herpes. So the researcher in Germany on this was clocking, and there's a fair amount of evidence that substances and humic substances have virucidal properties. We've known that for a long time. Matter of fact, we've known it since the 1960s. And then recent research sort of documents that. But how does it work? See, now, we know it can transport zinc. Now, recent research shows that it activates transcription. In other words, it turns off on pathways within the cell that activate functions of the cell, okay? And we know specific pathways in what they activate from substances in humic acid. Humic acid has a low molecular weight fraction called fulvic, and that's what can go through the cell membrane only. Okay, so it's the fulvic acid fraction of humic acids with an S, and then within that fulvic acid is compounds called polyphenols, and then things like tannins, carboxylics, a very complex range of biochemistry. Well, it turns out that some of those compounds we think within the polyphenols and the tannins turn on pathogen resistance pathways, also growth stimulator and insulin-like pathways. So we know humic substances do something in the cell, turn on resistance, which is why we see it seems to help plants resist diseases, and we're getting reports. I mean, there's plenty of research, folks, about the antiviral effects of fulvic acid, humic substances. Chinese have done a lot. Wu Jin-san is the Chinese name for fulvic acid. It means golden medicine. Now, the Ayurvedic medicine version of fulvic acid is called shilajit, and it's a mine deposit in a Himalayan mountain rainforest. And if you test it, you'll find it contains fulvic acid primarily. Now, in Ayurvedic medicine, for plague and resistance, they'll recommend shilajit. Okay, and this goes back thousands of years. In Russia, they call it momia. Here we call it fulvic acid, which is really fulvic fraction of humic acids. Okay, so the point of it is, as society progresses and the soils are, degraded, used up, these trace elements become deficient, like zinc. The organic matter component degrades, either washed away or oxidizes. You have to keep adding organic matter, like manure, compost, lignocellulosic waste, lots of stuff to soils. And then fungi break it down. They form fulvic acid, humic acid. And then the humic acids are formed, they're a higher molecular weight. That's your brown color, and then they degrade to the yellow golden color. Fulvic means golden color, gold, brass. Okay, that helps transport minerals into the plant roots, and then the fulvic acid is in the plants. It's in the animals that eat the plants. It's in the water because they're leached from the soil into the water. And then human beings and animals eat those and ingest the humic substances. Their resistance, it helps their resistance, uptake of important minerals like selenium and zinc. And when that goes the other way in history, a good example might be the Maya, which I've studied extensively. They had a very advanced civilization. They had writing, they had incredible architecture. They had a very advanced agriculture where they used irrigation technologies. I've been there, seen it. Okay, so they went on for quite a few times. You had the pre-classical, classical, post-classical periods in Mayan history. And then one day, they disappeared. We don't know why. There's theories it was warfare, it was drought, it was all these other effects. And it probably was a combination of those things. And it could have been viral diseases very easily. We just don't know. Matter of fact, we don't even find many bodies to analyze. You don't really, it's like they just picked up and went. We don't know where. Okay, but they relied on corn and beans. There wasn't any animals much. They didn't have chickens. They didn't have cows, goats, sheep, or nothing. Like if you wanted meat, it was either deer, turkey, or human flesh, which they would consume because they were pretty much bloodthirsty because of deficiencies in amino acids made them that way. So very likely they did deplete the soil. Okay. Eventually they were farming in sort of peaty lowlands called bajos. And then they did kind of an organic farming technique that was pretty effective for a long, long time. But as the populations grew, that wasn't working anymore. They deforested the entire area. Now it's big, well, most of it's a rainforest today, but there was a point in Guatemala, Belize, Mexico, where the Maya were is completely deforested. So they know that from pollen analysis. Okay, so they got to the point where they probably created a drought by deforesting a tropical area. I mean, we've seen this even in Hawaii on Molokai, where they deforested it and caused a drought. They reforested the mountains and the hills, and it started raining again. So we think that's part of it. But you see, what I'm saying is that as the soil goes, as the ecosystem goes, so does the civilization. The health of the civilization, the people, the animals, etc., is dependent on the health of the soil. The health of the soil is dependent on the health of fungi that are being fed, nourished with organic matter, recycled organic matter, crop residue, human waste, animal waste, compost, humates, etc., so that humic substances can form, so nutrients can be released, so you have uptake of trace elements and all the other good effects. So once that breaks down, the society breaks down, civilizations collapse. And that's not speculation. We've had collapse of civilizations going so far back that, before recorded history, I mean, you had Neanderthals, you had the Denovians, you had the, just a whole range, of situations. And, they say, well, it was about war. It was about, one group like coming in and taking over another area. Yeah, resource depletion in one area means that folks are going to come into another area and try to take what you got. And so that leads to warfare. And I think we have evidence of that now in Europe, where they find mass burials that date back to the, Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age. It seems to indicate that. So it's hard to just say it's one thing that did it. But when there's environmental degradation in one area, that pushes people to another area, like the Sahara dried up due to overgrazing and a range of effects that we're not sure of. But I kind of think the same story. And those people pushed into the Middle East, and there's been turmoil there ever since. And now those same folks that are pushing in from North Africa, the Middle East, into Europe. See, so, and then you're going to have South American people from Central America and Mexico, which are actually Americans, because it's America, are pushing north, trying to survive. The family's trying to survive because they've got drought, poor crop yields, diseases. So it makes them want to move. So it all boils down to one thing: depletion of soils. If that wasn't true, people wouldn't have kept moving west. I'm sitting in Oregon, 40 miles from the Pacific Ocean. We're in the Willamette Valley, which is one of the most fertile places on Earth. Used to be, yeah. But now with heavy equipment and chemicals, they deplete things even faster than ever. And it's really a sad story. But I have a farm here, and I managed to, I know how to maintain the soil. I know how to build it back. But unfortunately, my neighbors, they're on the downward spiral, crop rescue, the whole thing, heavy equipment. You just get a bigger tractor every year. You get more chemicals, and there's less farmers every year. Okay, here we go again. And we're at the Pacific Ocean. We're right up against coastal range mountains. So there's no expanding to the west. There's only selling your land and moving into town and getting a job. Okay. So, that's really my rant for today. But, I threw some suggestions out there and some ideas that you can do your own research and determine what you believe, what you're going to do. I'm not giving advice. I'm just like a historian or a scientist, just telling a story. I'm not like giving advice, but as a plant, but I'm not a doctor. I'm Dr. Faust, yes, but I'm not a medical doctor, and I don't give medical advice. Now, we do have a website, that's operated by somebody who is an MD, who sells some products that will provide resistance, like fulvic acid, medical grade, mushrooms, Asian mushrooms, things that we've determined increases your immune response to lots of things. And that's wujinsan.us. That's WUJINSAN.us. Then our horticultural products are bioag.com. It's BIOAG.com. So that's Wujinsan, WUJINSAN. It means black cold medicine in Chinese. Wujinsan.us. You can get more information there. And I just wish everybody the best. And anything you can do to prevent infection, and it looks to me you can also do your own work, that having a high level of zinc can make sure you're not deficient in selenium. So zinc, selenium, and humic substances, fulvic acid, seems to play a part in the whole thing. Well, in the case of fulvic acid, is the living link between the dead mineral of the soil and the living plant root. It just is, It's the difference between the earth and the moon. So that's it, And if you want to find out more, listen to my last video about the mineral versus humus theory of plant nutrition, which also becomes human nutrition. Thank you.